The roast was still warm when the candles began to flicker and die. Each tiny flame snuffed out like the last hope I had for the evening. My burgundy dress clung tightly to my frame, not with elegance, but with disappointment. 8 plates sat untouched on the dining room table, each one a silent witness to my humiliation. Outside, the world moved on. Car engines, laughter from neighbors, the faint chime of wind through the oak trees. But inside my house, everything had stopped. Time, breathing, belief. And when I opened Instagram, it all shattered. A yacht, champagne, my grandchildren building sandcastles in golden Adriatic light, my son, my sister, my family beaming without me. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was an erasure. When I turned 64, I organized a dinner to celebrate with my family. No one showed up. That very evening, my son's wife shared photos of everyone vacationing on a luxury yacht. I just smiled when they returned. I handed her a DNA test that turned her face ghost white. I'm grateful you're here. Stick with my story to the end, and drop a comment with your city so I know how far this reaches. I spent nearly a month planning my 64th birthday dinner. Selecting the perfect dishes, decorating the dining room with fresh lilies, calling every single guest to confirm they'd be there. I even bought a new dress. Burgundy, with tiny silver buttons, the kind Jonah always said made me look timeless. I set the table for 8, carefully placing name cards in my best cursive. Jonah, Harper, little Mason who just turned 6, sweet Isla who's 4, my sister Nadine, her husband Gordon, and of course me, sitting at the head of the table where I could see everyone's smiles. By 6:30 p.m., no one had arrived. The house felt unusually quiet. Not the comforting kind of quiet, but the kind that settles like dust on an old memory. I checked the clock, then my reflection in the hallway mirror, lipstick still fresh, hair set just right. I smiled at myself, willing the corners of my mouth to hold, but the image looking back at me already knew. I checked my phone 3 times, wondering if I'd made a mistake, but there it was. Birthday dinner, 6 p.m. in my calendar. I'd even sent everyone reminders 2 days before. By 7, I tried calling Jonah, straight to voicemail. Then Harper, nothing. Nadine didn't answer either, which was strange. She always picked up on the second ring. I stood there, staring at untouched plates. The candles I had lit an hour earlier were down to nubs. The roast in the oven was going cold. The chocolate torte I'd made from scratch sat pristine and untouched on the counter. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe something unexpected came up. Maybe they'd all simply forgotten. But forgetting feels different. Forgetting stings. This hollowed me out. It was the kind of absence that doesn't come with explanations, only the sharp edges of realization. I kept telling myself that, even as my chest tightened and my hands shook. By 8, I knew. They weren't coming. I slumped into my chair and looked around at the empty seats. This wasn't a delay. This was something else. The silence in the house didn't feel peaceful. It felt abandoned, as if even the walls were waiting for something that never came. That's when I made the mistake of opening Instagram. Right at the top of my feed was a photo that made my blood run cold. Harper, glowing in a white sundress, her arm around Jonah, who was beaming in a way I hadn't seen in years. Behind them, endless blue water. The caption read, "Making memories on the Adriatic Sea. Grateful for this perfect family escape." I scrolled further. Mason and Ela were playing on a sunlit beach. Nadine and Gordon clinked glasses in what looked like an upscale bar aboard the ship. Everyone was there, everyone but me. The timestamp on the post showed it had gone up less than an hour ago, while I was still sitting at the table, waiting. They were thousands of miles away, sipping champagne at sunset and laughing. Somewhere on that sunset-lit deck of the cruise ship, while they toasted each other over cocktails, something fractured inside my chest. Not shattered, but splintered, like a frozen lake cracking beneath sudden weight. They'd planned this, all of them. Harper had arranged a full family trip, timed perfectly, to land on my birthday, and somehow got everyone to join in, even Nadine. My own sister, who just last week had helped me pick out centerpieces and ribbons for this dinner. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, seeping in like cold air under a door. A slow, creeping realization that I had been excluded. Not by accident, but by design. I stared at that photo until my eyes blurred. Harper's smile seemed brighter than usual, like she had won. She stood in the very spot I should have been, at the heart of my family, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me most. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from Jonah. "Sorry, Mom, meant to tell you, we'll be out of town this week. Harper booked a surprise trip. Happy birthday, though." Meant to tell me? As if forgetting to mention a cruise through the Adriatic was something that could just slip someone's mind, as if planning it for my birthday was just coincidence. I set the phone down gently, afraid that if I held it 1 second longer, I'd hurl it into the wall. The roast was ice cold by now. I walked into the kitchen and turned off the oven. My steps felt strange, robotic, distant, like I was watching myself from the outside. There she was, this woman in her burgundy dress with silver buttons, cleaning up a dinner no one came to. I wrapped the cake and slid it into the fridge, blew out what little remained of the candles, started placing the good china back into the cabinet, each dish clinking loudly in the quiet room. With every plate I stacked away, a different memory surfaced. Mason's 3rd birthday when he smeared frosting on his nose, Isla's first Thanksgiving when she fell asleep at the table, Jonah's wedding rehearsal dinner where he whispered, "Thanks for everything, Mom." They weren't just moments, they were proof that I had once belonged, that I had mattered. Harper had claimed something tonight, though I didn't quite know what. Maybe power, maybe Jonah, maybe just the satisfaction of pushing me aside. What I knew, with painful certainty, was that for the first time in my 64 years I felt completely invisible, not just forgotten, but erased. When I turned off the dining room lights, I caught my reflection in the dark glass, smaller, fainter. The woman looking back at me was someone who had spent decades keeping the peace, remembering everyone's birthdays and anniversaries, smoothing over every family fight. She had always put everyone else first, and they had chosen to spend her birthday pretending she didn't exist. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, each step heavier than the last. Tomorrow, I'd have to endure the fallout, the hollow apologies, the half-hearted excuses about miscommunication. Harper's saccharine voice saying it was all planned months ago, that her hands were tied. But tonight, I just needed to sit with this pain, to feel it completely. Because this wasn't just a forgotten dinner. It was the sign of something far deeper and far more intentional. This wasn't just about a birthday. It was something deeper, something deliberate, and far more cruel than I'd ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every family moment from the past 5 years. That dinner wasn't forgotten. It was sabotaged, and the longer I lay there, the more memories surfaced. One by one, each more disturbing than the last, Mason's 4th birthday party. I had been so excited to watch him blow out the candles, but when I got to the venue, Harper greeted me at the door with that carefully crafted apologetic smile. "Oh, Eloise, didn't Jonah tell you? We had to move the party to tomorrow. Something urgent came up." But I could hear children laughing inside. I saw the balloons through the window. Later, when I called Jonah, he sounded genuinely puzzled. "Tomorrow? No, Mom, the party was today." Maybe Harper got the days mixed up. Another time, Isla's first day of kindergarten. I'd asked Harper 3 separate times what time they were dropping her off, just so I could be there with my camera. "Oh, we're doing it super early," she'd said, "like 7 a.m. Probably too early for you." Still, I showed up anyway. The teacher told me Ela had arrived right on time, 8:30 a.m. I missed her first walk into the classroom, missed her shy little wave goodbye to Jonah. And then there was last Christmas. Harper called me 2 days before, her voice full of artificial sympathy. "Eloise, I hate to say this, but Jonah's been so stressed with work. He asked if we could just keep it small this year, just immediate family. So I spent Christmas alone, reheating leftovers, watching old movies." Days later, Nadine told me there'd been a huge party. She'd seen the pictures on social media, 20 people, college friends, neighbors, even distant relatives, everyone. Except me. Each memory slid into place like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and suddenly the picture became clear. This wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't forgetfulness or chaos. It was planned. Methodical. I rose as the first light of dawn filled the kitchen and made coffee, my hands still trembling, not just from exhaustion, but from something else entirely, a slow, rising dread. I opened my phone and started scrolling through Harper's social media posts from the past year. This time, really looking. Not just glancing. Not just scrolling mindlessly. There she was, sitting front row at Mason's school play, right next to Jonah. I had asked about that exact event. Harper told me it had been canceled due to a flu outbreak. Then I saw her at Isla's dance recital. The one she told me was just a casual practice. Nothing formal, nothing worth coming out for. Photo after photo. Moments I never knew happened. Celebrations I had never been invited to. Each post was captioned with lines like, "Grateful for these memories," and "Family means everything." But I wasn't in any of them. The cruelest part was how effortlessly complete it all looked. Harper tucked into Jonah's side, the kids smiling, arms around their parents, everyone glowing, everyone together, as if I was never part of that picture to begin with. I set the phone down, quietly, and turned to stare out the kitchen window. My gaze landed on the garden I had planted when Jonah was still a boy. He used to help me in those flower beds, carefully pulling weeds with tiny hands, worried he'd hurt the roots. When had I lost him? When had I stopped being essential to his joy? And then the answer struck, sharp and simple. The moment Harper stepped into our lives. Before her, Jonah used to call me twice a week. We had dinner together every other Sunday, like clockwork. He'd ask me for advice about work, about life. He'd share stories just to hear my reaction. He was my son. My friend, my glimpse into the future I had helped shape. Then Harper arrived, and little by little it changed. The Sunday dinners became monthly. "Harper's been planning these amazing meals," Jonah explained. "She loves having our weekends just for us." Then the calls slowed, reserved only for obligatory check-ins on birthdays or Mother's Day. "Sorry, Mom, can't talk long. Harper's got our day pretty packed." She never said anything cruel. Never anything overt. That wasn't her style. She spoke in the pauses, in the offhand comments, in the quiet spaces between words. "Your mom seems a little worn out lately. Maybe we shouldn't overwhelm her with the kids this weekend. I saw your mom at the store yesterday. She looked a bit off. Is she doing okay on her own?" Each phrase was a seed of doubt, planted with care. Subtle suggestions that I wasn't dependable anymore. That I was slipping. Fragile. A problem to be managed instead of a person to be included. Even the way she hugged me changed. Too long, too gentle. Her hand rubbed my back like I was some breakable old woman, not her equal. Not Jonah's mother. It was in the little things, the subtle ways Harper would steer the kids away mid-conversation. "Grandma Eloise has had a long day, sweethearts. Why don't you go show Daddy your new drawings instead?" And Jonah, my beautiful, trusting son, had absorbed it all without resistance. He'd started looking at me the way Harper did, with affection, yes, but also with that soft edge of pity, like I was something delicate, sweet, but slowly becoming unnecessary. I'd become background noise in my own life, a guest in their home. The woman who used to be the anchor now gently nudged aside, like a favorite book they'd already read. The phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. Jonah's name lit up on the screen. "Hey, Mom," he said brightly, his voice relaxed, casual, like everything was fine. "Just wanted to call and say happy belated birthday." My chest tightened. "Sorry we missed it, but this trip's been amazing. Harper really nailed the planning." I gripped the phone harder. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice even. "I saw the pictures." "Oh good. She's been posting non-stop," he laughed. "The kids are having such a great time. Mason learned how to snorkel yesterday, and Isla made friends with this little girl from Boston. You would have loved seeing them." Would I? Because from where I sat, it didn't seem like anyone had even noticed I wasn't there. "It must have been a last-minute decision," I said carefully. "I know, right? Harper found this crazy good deal and just jumped on it. That's what I love about her, so spontaneous." Spontaneous? That's what he called planning a cruise that overlapped exactly with my birthday? "Jonah," I began, then stopped. What could I say? That his wife was isolating me piece by piece? That she'd been quietly cutting me out of their lives for years? He'd think I was being dramatic, bitter, refusing to accept that he'd grown up. Maybe I was all those things. But I was also right. I had watched it happen in real time, how Harper took charge of every plan, every detail, until there was no room left for my voice, my ideas, my presence. A dozen little decisions that added up to one devastating outcome. I no longer had a seat at the table. "You sure everything's okay, Mom? You sound a little off." I closed my eyes. and I felt the full weight of every erased moment. Every holiday I wasn't invited to, every milestone I didn't witness, every photo where my absence felt not accidental, but intentional. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired." "Well, get some rest. We'll be back next week, and I promise we'll plan something really special to make up for missing your birthday." Another promise, another one. Harper would find a way to cancel. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and watched the light shift, from golden morning to dull afternoon. And I thought about the years still to come. More lonely birthdays, more milestones missed, more family pictures where I didn't exist at all. I tried to picture future holidays. Empty chairs where laughter should be, cards that never arrived, the growing silence between us padded with excuses and well-meaning lies. It wasn't just grief, it was exile. For the first time since my husband passed away 8 years ago, I felt truly orphaned. Not by death, but by something far worse, the slow, intentional erasure of my place in the only family I had left. And yet, as the ache in my chest flared, hot, sharp, impossible to ignore, I realized something else was beginning to rise. Anger. Not wild or explosive, but cold and precise. A kind of sacred fury that came from love pushed too far. And I knew, this time, I wasn't going to swallow it. I wasn't going to fade away quietly. If Harper wanted to play games, she'd chosen the wrong opponent. I had raised Jonah alone when his father walked out. I juggled 2 jobs just to put him through college. I'd shelved my own ambitions so he could have every chance at a better life. I had earned my place in this family, and I wasn't about to surrender it without a fight. I just needed to understand exactly what I was fighting. It was Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the birthday that never happened, when the doorbell rang. I was still in my robe, nursing my second cup of coffee, staring at a pile of unopened thank you cards I'd bought for guests who never came. The sound startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and truthfully, I rarely got unexpected visitors anymore. My isolation had become curated, comfortable even. It was easier to sink into routines than face the echo of absence in every corner of my life. The doorbell broke that silence like a crack of thunder. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s maybe. Dark hair, lines of stress etched deep around his eyes. He looked well-dressed but rumpled, like he'd been traveling. His hands were shoved into his coat pockets and he kept glancing around, uneasy, like he wasn't sure he belonged on my porch. I nearly walked away. After the cruise incident, I had no patience for door-to-door salesmen or church folk. But something about his posture stopped me. The tension in his shoulders, the way he seemed to be summoning courage just to stand there. There was a kind of quiet desperation in his stance, like he was balancing on the edge of something important, and if I shut the door now, he might fall completely. "Can I help you?" I called through the door. "Mrs. Whitman?" His voice was cautious, uncertain. "Eloise Whitman. Jonah's mother?" My heart lurched. How did this man know my son's name? "Who's asking?" There was a pause. And then he said something that turned the air in my lungs to ice. "My name is David Chen. I need to talk to you about Harper." I opened the door slowly, chains still latched. "What about Harper?" Up close, David looked even more distressed. His hands trembled slightly. He had the look of someone who hadn't slept in days. Dark circles, hollow eyes, a man worn thin by something he couldn't shake. There was grief in his expression, grief and something sharper, the brittle edge of someone who'd been holding on to the truth for far too long. "This is going to sound insane, Mrs. Whitman, but I think," he swallowed, voice shaking, "I think my son might be living in your son's house." The chain suddenly felt heavy between my fingers. "What are you talking about?" "Mason," he said, and hearing the name felt like being punched in the chest. Mason. 7 years old. Brown hair, there's a scar on his chin from when he fell off his bike when he was 4. I stared at him, stunned. Because Mason did have a scar on his chin. Jonah had told me about the bike accident, how terrified they were, rushing Mason to the ER. I remembered the panic in his voice as he recounted it, but how could this stranger possibly know that? "I think you'd better come in," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. David Chen stepped inside and sat on my living room couch like he might take off running at any second. I offered him coffee, but he shook his head. His hands were clamped so tightly in his lap, his knuckles had turned ghost white. His entire posture radiated unease, as if the truth he carried was too heavy to set down, too dangerous to keep holding. "I don't even know where to begin," he said. "This is going to sound crazy." "Try me," I replied. "It's been a strange week." He took a shaky breath. "Harper and we were together for 2 years. My breath caught. This was before she met your son, before she married him. We lived together, talked about the future, about marriage, and then she got pregnant." My coffee cup suddenly felt too heavy in my hands. I placed it gently on the table, afraid I might drop it. "I was thrilled," David continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to get married right away. I started planning everything, but Harper, she kept hesitating, said she needed time to think, that she wasn't ready." He paused, and then, one day, I came home and she was gone. "Gone?" I asked. "All of it. Her things, her clothes, photos, even her toothbrush. It was like she'd never lived there." His voice cracked under the weight of the memory, and for a moment he looked like a man still stuck in that apartment doorway, stunned, searching for someone who had vanished into thin air. "Did you look for her?" "Of course I did, for months. I filed a missing person report, hired a private investigator, posted on every forum and app and social media site I could think of. Nothing." He rubbed his face with both hands. "The PI finally told me to let it go, said some people just don't want to be found." A cold unease began to settle in my chest. "What does this have to do with Mason?" David sat up straighter, eyes fixed on mine. 3 months ago, I was in Sacramento for a conference. I was out walking downtown during lunch, and I saw them, Harper and a little boy." His voice faltered. "A boy who looked exactly like I did at that age. Same chin, same eyes, same way he tilts his head when he's thinking." His words weren't dramatic, they were careful, deliberate, as if he'd rehearsed them 1,000 times, but still couldn't believe they were real. I stared, frozen. "I followed them for 3 blocks, he said softly. "Mrs. Whitman, I looked at that little boy and I just knew. I knew he was mine." The room swayed around me. "You're saying Mason is your son?" "I'm saying I think he is," he replied. "Harper was 2 months pregnant when she left me. If she carried to term, Mason would be exactly his age now." David reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. "Look," he showed me a photo, a boy about 6 or 7 years old. It was him, no doubt. The same eyes as Mason, the same stubborn jawline, even the same tiny gap between his front teeth, the one Mason always tried to hide when he smiled. My hands trembled. It could be coincidence. There are millions of kids. But something deep inside me whispered, it's not. That's what I told myself at first too, that it was probably just a coincidence. But then I started digging. David's voice had changed. It was firmer now, focused. "I hired another investigator, someone better. And what he found, Harper Martinez, that's not even her real name." My pulse spiked. Her legal name is Margaret Winters, and this isn't the first time she's done something like this. "Done what?" I asked, though I already felt the answer sinking into my bones. "Disappeared. Left men when they started asking too many questions. Changed her name. Reinvented herself." He leaned forward, the weight of the truth heavy in his eyes. "My investigator found 2 other men. Both of them had serious relationships with her. Both of them said she left suddenly, like she vanished off the face of the earth. Just like she did with me." I sat there frozen. "One of them thinks she might have been pregnant when she left too." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why now?" David looked down, then back up, his expression pained. "Because I've been watching from a distance, for 3 months, trying to decide if I had the right to show up, to disrupt a child's life over gut feelings and half-formed memories." His voice cracked. "But then I saw the photos, from your son's vacation, the family cruise, everyone smiling, laughing like nothing in the world could be wrong." He paused, and I realized something that made me sick. "What?" I whispered. "You weren't in any of them." My breath caught. "I went through all of Harper's social media," he said. "Hundreds of photos, family trips, birthday parties, holidays. Mason and Isla were in every single one. Jonah was in most." He swallowed hard. "But you were barely there, like you'd been edited out." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I thought about all those missed celebrations, all the last-minute plan changes, all those times I felt like a guest in my own family's life. "She's doing it to him too," David said, quieter now. "To Jonah, the same thing she did to me. She isolates you, makes you feel like you're the difficult one, like everyone else is just trying to protect themselves. She's rewriting everything, I whispered, and she's doing it slowly enough that no one even notices. David nodded. And if Mason really is my son, then he's not the only one who's been lied to. You've been hurt too. You deserve the truth as much as I do. He reached into his coat and pulled out a manila envelope. This is why I came today, Mrs. Whitman, why I finally worked up the courage to knock on your door. What is it? DNA test results. I stared at the envelope in his hands. I managed to get a hair sample from Mason, from the barber shop where Harper takes him, had it tested against my DNA. His fingers trembled as he held it out to me. I got the results yesterday. I didn't take it. Not yet. Inside that envelope was the power to either destroy my family or protect it, and I had no way of knowing which. Before you open it, David said gently, you need to understand something else. I looked up at him. I don't want to take Mason away from the only father he's ever known. I'm not trying to uproot his life, David said, his voice softer now. I don't want to traumatize him. But I can't just sit back and watch Harper lie to everyone who cares about him, including you. I looked at him, feeling the weight of everything he'd said pressing down on my chest. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help make sure he's protected. From whatever twisted story she spun around all of us. David's voice was calm now. Steady, unflinching. Because if she's lied about this, Mrs. Whitman, then what else has she lied about? And who else is she going to hurt? I stared down at the envelope in my hands. It felt heavier than anything I'd ever held before. Outside, a car door slammed. Children laughed as they passed my house, the comforting sounds of an ordinary afternoon in a quiet, unsuspecting neighborhood. A world where mothers didn't vanish with someone else's child. Where grandmothers weren't ghosted out of family photos. But now those ordinary sounds felt distant, almost surreal, as if they belonged to someone else's life. One where betrayal didn't hollow out birthdays, where love didn't get rewritten behind your back. But my world hadn't been ordinary for a long time. I just refused to see it. Mrs. Whitman? David's voice was gentle now, almost kind. Are you ready to know the truth? I thought about Mason's bright, eager smile. The way he used to run toward me with open arms before Harper began subtly discouraging him from doing so. I thought about Isla, who barely knew me anymore, because I'd been quietly shut out of her early years. I thought about Jonah, my son, who'd been gradually turned against me, drop by drop, over years of whispered manipulations. I thought about that empty birthday table, and the hundreds of smiling photos where I simply wasn't. Each memory pressed into me like a bruise, still tender, still unhealed. Yes, I said, and I opened the envelope. The DNA results were sterile, cold, written in the kind of language that didn't care about emotional fallout, 99.7% probability of paternity. So final, so impersonal. A handful of numbers capable of undoing a lifetime of love and memory. The numbers blurred before my eyes. I read them again and again, wishing, desperately, that they would somehow change. That this was all a cruel misunderstanding. But the truth was right there. Mason wasn't Jonah's son. He wasn't my grandson. The little boy I had rocked to sleep, helped tie shoes, read bedtime stories to, he wasn't my blood. And Jonah, who had named Mason after his own grandfather, had no idea he was raising someone else's child. I'm sorry, David said quietly. He was still sitting across from me, watching my face closely, waiting for my reaction. I know this must be devastating. I set the papers down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. How long have you known for sure? I asked. Since yesterday, he said, but I've suspected for months. He pulled out his phone again and started swiping through photos. Not family snapshots, surveillance photos. Mason at the park. Mason walking into school. Mason riding a bike on a street I recognized, my street. I've been following them, David said. I know how this all sounds, David said, his voice low but steady, but I had to be sure. You've been watching my family, I said. I've been watching my son, he corrected gently, and trying to understand what kind of woman could steal a child and build her entire life on that lie. That's when the anger hit me. Sharp, immediate, overwhelming. But it wasn't directed at David. He was just another casualty of the same quiet war. The fury was for Harper, for the depth of her manipulation, for how fully and flawlessly she had rewritten reality. She hadn't just hidden the truth about Mason, she'd built an entire marriage on that lie. Used a child as emotional leverage to secure a future she never earned. She trapped Jonah, I said, the words spilling out, raw and bitter. She got pregnant with someone else's baby and used it to lock him in. David nodded, his face tight. That's how it looks. The timeline fits. She left me at about 2 months pregnant, just starting to show. If she acted fast, found someone kind and steady, she could have pulled it off. She did, I said quietly. I remembered Jonah's call, voice breathless with joy, telling me Harper was in labor. Mason had arrived 3 weeks early. Jonah was worried. But the doctor said everything was fine, because everything was fine. Mason wasn't premature. He was exactly on time, just not on Jonah's timeline. Harper's sudden romance, the lightning-fast engagement, a wedding just 6 months after they met. I used to think it was love at first sight. Now I saw it for what it really was, strategy. She needed a father before the baby came, I said flatly. Someone solid. Someone who wouldn't question the dates. Someone trusting, David added. Someone who'd never think to ask for a paternity test, because it wouldn't even cross his mind. I swallowed hard. That was Jonah. My son, who always believed the best in people. Who never imagined lies could grow this big, this quietly. And Harper had used that trust like a weapon. There's more, David said. His tone changed, heavier now. And something inside me clenched. The investigator I hired, he found some other things, about Harper. Things that might explain why she's been pushing you out. What things? David reached into his bag and pulled out a manila folder. He handed it to me without a word. Inside were photos, documents, proof. Inside the folder were what looked like official documents, copies of records, court filings, license applications. Her real name is Margaret Winters, David said. She's 34, not 31 like she told Jonah. She grew up in the foster care system, aged out at 18, no known family, no real ties to anyone. I stared at a photo that looked like it came from a high school yearbook. The face was unmistakably Harper, but younger, sharper. Her features were the same, but something in her expression was different. The woman in the photo had harder eyes. Her hair was darker, styled plainly. But what truly stood out was the look behind her gaze, a kind of desperate hunger. She's been married before, David continued. Twice. Once to a man named Robert Kim in Nevada, then to a James Fletcher in Oregon. Both marriages ended in divorce within 2 years. And both ended with generous alimony settlements, he added. She's done this before, I whispered. The pattern's always the same, David said. She finds someone stable, someone with either money or emotional security. Moves fast, gets them attached, then starts isolating them. From friends, from family, from anyone who might ask too many questions. I thought of Jonah's college friends, how they stopped visiting after Harper entered the picture. How he barely talked about his coworkers anymore. How he constantly seemed overwhelmed and tired, but never gave specifics. I thought of how everything in his social life now revolved around Harper. She's been isolating him, I said slowly. David nodded. And isolating you, because you're the biggest threat to her control. He leaned forward, his voice calm but intense. Mothers remember things. They spot what others miss. They know timelines, patterns. They ask the right questions. She needed me gone, I said, the realization cold and sharp. Not just gone, David said, erased. He met my eyes. That's why she sabotaged the birthday party. Why she rewrote the narrative around every missed event, every late invitation. She's been conditioning your family to operate without you. The cruelty of it all hit me like a sudden wind, knocking the air from my lungs. But why? I whispered. She already had Jonah. He believed Mason was his son. She had everything. So why go to such extremes just to shut me out? Because you remember, David said quietly. You know the dates, when they met, when she said she got pregnant, when Mason was born. If you had ever started doing the math, started asking questions, you might have unraveled it. His voice was soft, but certain. She needed you become irrelevant before you became dangerous. I stood abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. Still. That stretch of pavement where Mason had learned to ride his bike. I could still see him there, wobbling, falling, this brushing off skinned knees, cheering when he finally coasted down the sidewalk without help. That little boy, he was still the same. Still sweet, still funny, still him. But everything about Mason's place in our family was a lie. What about Isla? I asked, my voice barely audible, already fearing the answer. As far as I can tell, Isla is Jonah's daughter, David said. She was born 2 years after Mason, and by then Harper and your son were definitely together. He paused. But Mrs. Whitman. What? Her birth might have been calculated too, a way to ensure Jonah never questioned Mason's paternity. If Harper gave him a biological child, he'd be far less likely to wonder about the first. It would strengthen the illusion. Cement the family unit. My stomach turned. Everything about my son's marriage, his children, the life he had built for the past 7 years, had been choreographed by a woman who didn't see him as a partner, but as a strategy. She had used children, innocent children, as tools. Mason doesn't know, does he? I asked. Of course not. He's 7. As far as he knows, Jonah's always been his dad. And Isla? She just thinks she has a big brother who doesn't look like her. Kids don't question that, but adults do. Or they should. I understood then. I finally understood why Harper had tried so hard to push me out of the picture. Because a grandmother who spent real time with her grandkids, who knew them, who watched them closely, might start noticing things, might start asking questions about eye color, bone structure, genetic traits that didn't quite add up. David, I said slowly, why now? You could have gone to court, filed for paternity. Why bring me into this? He looked down, then back up. I thought about that, he admitted. But when I saw those cruise photos, something hit me. He took a breath. Harper isn't just erasing my connection to my son, she's erasing yours too. And if we don't stop her, she's going to keep doing it. To others. What do you mean? She's already isolating Jonah, pulling him away from his friends, his co-workers, making him completely dependent on her for everything. And worse, she's teaching the kids to see her as the only real parent. I flinched. Mason barely even mentions you anymore, David said. When I've watched them at the park, it's like she's deleting you from his memory. The words landed like a blow to the chest. I thought of Mason's recent distance, how he'd stopped running to hug me when I came over, how he started glancing at Harper before answering me. I had thought it was just growing pains, a phase, but maybe it wasn't. Eventually, David said, she's going to discard Jonah, just like she did with me. Just like she did with her other husbands, but not until she's made sure he has nothing left except her and the kids. He leaned forward, his voice low. No friends, no family, no backup. When she walks away, he'll be completely alone. I closed my eyes. I could see it. My son, devastated, abandoned, emotionally wrecked, maybe financially too. And the children, caught in the middle. Pieces on a board they didn't even know existed. What do you want me to do? I asked. David stood up, gathering the folder and scattering of photographs. I want you to help me save our family, he said. Both of us. Because that's what we are now, Mrs. Whitman. Family. He looked me in the eyes. You're Mason's grandmother in every way that matters, DNA or not. And I'm not going to let Harper erase that just because she's afraid of the truth. His words settled into my chest like an anchor, weighty, grounding, and more comforting than I expected. He held out a small card with his contact information. Think about it, but don't think too long. They'll be back from the cruise in a few days, and when they are, Harper's going to be watching, closely. She'll be looking for any sign that you're becoming a problem again. He tucked the envelope under his arm. If we're going to act, it has to be soon. After David left, I sat alone in my living room, had the DNA results in my lap and his card pressed between my fingers. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees. The house was quiet, still as a held breath. The late afternoon light pooled across the floor, casting long shadows like the remnants of everything I'd once believed to be true. But for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel hollow. It felt like the pause before a storm. Because Harper Martinez, or Margaret Winters, or whatever name she was using now, had made a fatal miscalculation. She thought she could erase me, thought she could write me out of my own family's story. But she was wrong. I wasn't gone. And now that I knew who she really was, I wasn't going anywhere. 3 days after they returned from the cruise, I called Jonah. I'd rehearsed the call over and over, until my voice didn't shake when I spoke. Hi, sweetheart, I began. I was wondering if we could all get together for dinner this weekend. I have something important I'd like to discuss, with you and Harper. There was a pause on the other end. Is everything okay, Mom? You sound serious. Everything's fine, I said smoothly. I just think it's time we had a real conversation. About us, about the future. I've been doing some thinking while you were away. Another pause, this one longer. I could hear Harper's voice faintly in the background, sharp and quick, but I couldn't make out the words. When Jonah came back on the line, his voice had shifted. Cautious now. Harper wants to know. What kind of conversation? She's concerned you might be upset about the cruise. The timing. Of course she was concerned. Harper's instincts were razor sharp. She could probably feel it. Something in my voice, some subtle shift. Even through the phone. Tell Harper I'm not upset, I said. Not about anything. I just think it's important for families to talk. Really talk. A pause. Then I added, Saturday evening would be perfect. I'll cook. Let me check with Harper and get back to you. Jonah replied. If it hadn't been so tragic, it might have been funny. My 38-year-old son needing permission from his wife to have dinner with his mother. But I kept my voice light, controlled. Of course. Let me know. He called back 2 hours later. Saturday works. 6 o'clock? Perfect, I said. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. That was Thursday. And from the moment I hung up, a current of tension settled into my bones, a quiet, persistent hum under every breath. I knew what I was about to do could shatter the illusion Jonah had been living in for years. But it wasn't just about Harper anymore. It was about truth. About reclaiming a place that had been quietly stolen from me. I spent all of Friday preparing, emotionally, mentally, practically, for what I knew might be the most important conversation of my life. David and I had met twice since his first visit. We'd planned it all carefully, how to present the truth in a way that would protect Mason, while exposing Harper's web of lies. The DNA results sat safely inside a manila folder on my kitchen counter, along with copies of the documents David's investigator had uncovered. Margaret Winter's true identity, her past marriages, the timeline that proved Mason couldn't possibly be Jonah's biological son. Everything was ready. If this was going to be the final dinner I ever shared with my son, I wanted it to begin the way it should have been all along. Warm, loving, filled with the food he'd grown up on. I made his favorite, pot roast with garlic, mashed potatoes, and green beans, the way he used to love them as a child. Saturday evening came. It was gray and drizzly, classic October gloom. I set the table with my best china, the same set I'd laid out for my birthday dinner 2 weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. They arrived right at 6. Harper wore a flowing cream-colored dress that softened her features and made her look almost ethereal. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup understated and flawless. She looked like a portrait of maternal warmth, a woman incapable of deception. But behind that flawless presentation, I now saw the machinery, the careful calculations, the power plays masked by grace. Every choice in her appearance tonight had a purpose. Mason barreled through the door first, full of 7-year-old energy and wonder. "Grandma Whitman," he yelled. "I learned how to swim on the cruise. Want to see me do the doggy paddle?" I wrapped him in a hug, my heart clenching, because what I was about to say tonight would change everything for this boy. I held on to him a second longer than usual, memorizing the feel of his arms around me, the sound of his voice, the brightness in his eyes, before all of it would be clouded by what came next. "Maybe after dinner, sweetheart," I said softly. "Go wash your hands, okay?" Ela followed behind him, quieter, clutching a well-loved doll with tangled blonde hair. At 5, she was more reserved than her brother, more hesitant around me since Harper had begun subtly pulling them away. But she still let me kiss her forehead before heading off with Mason. Jonah stepped inside last. He hugged me warmly, and for a brief moment I let myself pretend this was just dinner. Just family, just love. "Something smells incredible," he said, smiling. "Mom, I've missed your cooking," Jonah said as he took his seat. "You look tired," I observed, and he did. There were new lines etched around his eyes. He looked thinner, worn. "Work's been brutal lately," he admitted. "The merger's got everyone scrambling." He cast a glance toward Harper, who was silently scanning the room like she was cataloging weak points. "But Harper keeps reminding me I need to find a better balance. She says the stress is killing me." Harper appeared beside him like a conjured shadow, her smile effortless. "I keep encouraging Jonah to consider early retirement," she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. We could travel more, spend time with the kids. Just live. Early retirement, at 38. Another way to make him completely dependent on her. No career, no independence, no escape. I smiled back, calm and pleasant. How thoughtful that you're thinking about the future. That actually ties into what I wanted to talk about tonight. Over dinner, I kept the conversation light. Mason and Isla were a whirlwind of cruise stories, Mason bragging about snorkeling and Isla excitedly recounting her new friend from Boston. Harper played the role to perfection, cutting Mason's chicken into bite-sized pieces, gently reminding Isla to wipe her mouth. She was good at this. Effortlessly warm, lovingly attentive, absolutely believable. But I saw what I hadn't before. The way she gently interrupted when Mason started talking about how much he'd missed me while they were away. The way she redirected Isla's attention when she asked why I hadn't come along. She managed everything, each interaction, each glance, each moment of connection, quietly steering them all away from me. When the kids finished eating, I suggested they play in the living room while the adults talked. Harper's objection came immediately. Oh, they really should be heading out soon. It's a school night. We like to keep their bedtime routine consistent. This won't take long, I said more firmly than before, and what I have to share might actually affect their routine quite a bit. Something flickered across her face then. Fear. Just for a second. But I saw it. Once the kids were settled with their toys, I returned to the dining room. The manila folder sat next to my coffee cup like something volatile. So, Jonah said, glancing toward Harper and taking her hand. What did you want to talk about? I took a deep breath. This was it. I want to talk about honesty. About family. About knowing who we really are. Harper's smile tightened, barely visible, but it was there. That's a little philosophical for dinner talk, don't you think? She said lightly. Is it? I replied. I don't think so. I reached for the folder, watching both of them stiffen. You see, I've learned some interesting things recently. About family history, about genetics, about how important it is to have accurate medical records. Jonah's face began to pale. Mom, he said cautiously. What's in the folder? Jonah asked, his voice low. The truth, I said simply. I opened it and slowly pulled out the DNA test results, laying them flat on the table between us. These are the results of a paternity test, I continued. For Mason. The silence was absolute. Jonah stared at the documents like they might suddenly catch fire. Harper didn't move. Her expression was perfectly still, too still. A paternity test? Jonah echoed, barely above a whisper. Why would you? How did you even? The test shows, I said gently, that you are not Mason's biological father. There's a 99.7% probability that another man is. I took a breath. His name is David Chen. Harper shot to her feet, her chair screeching loudly against the hardwood floor. This is insane, Margaret, I said. The name landed like a grenade. She flinched, actually stumbled back a step, her face draining of color. Jonah's head snapped between us. Margaret, he repeated, his voice full of confusion and rising dread. Mom, what's going on? I pulled out the rest of the file. Documents, timelines, marriage certificates. Her real name is Margaret Winters. She's been married before, twice. Each time she left with alimony and a trail of lies. She has a history of hiding who she is. I looked him in the eye. She was in a relationship with David Chen before she met you. She left him while pregnant with his child. Then she came to find someone new, a stable man who wouldn't ask too many questions. That's not true, Harper said quickly, but her voice trembled now. Jonah, please. Don't listen to this. Your mother? She's clearly not well. Mason was born 7 months after you and Harper met, I pressed on. You thought he was premature, but he wasn't. He was right on time for her timeline, not yours. Jonah picked up the DNA results with hands that were visibly shaking. I watched his face as the numbers hit, watched the color drain. This can't be right, he whispered. David's been searching for his son for I said. He found you 3 months ago. He's been observing, trying to decide how to protect Mason without destroying him. I turned to Harper, because he recognized the pattern. The same manipulation, the same isolation tactics, the same lies. Harper was edging toward the door now, her practiced calm gone, replaced by sheer panic. Jonah, please, she begged. Don't let her do this. Don't let her ruin what we have. Think of our life, our family. Our family? Jonah's voice cracked. Our family that's built on a lie? He looked up, hollowed out. Our son, who isn't even mine. He is your son in every way that matters, I told Jonah, my voice calm but firm. You raised him. You love him. Based on a lie, he exploded, slamming his palm against the table hard enough to make the silverware jump. From the living room came the sweet, distant sound of Mason and Isla's laughter, innocent and oblivious, their world still intact. Ours was crumbling in the next room. There's more, I said gently, pulling another set of documents from the folder. These are records of Harper's previous marriages. She's done this before. Found men, married them fast, cut them off from their families, then left when it no longer served her. I paused, letting the weight of it land. You're not her first target, Jonah. You're just the most successful one. Jonah stared at the pages, his breath short, his jaw clenched. The cruise, he said suddenly. Your birthday. That wasn't a coincidence, was it? Harper said nothing. She didn't have to. The silence was louder than any denial. You planned it, Jonah said bitterly. You made sure Mom would be alone on her birthday, while the rest of us were laughing and smiling on some ship. His voice cracked. You wanted to hurt her. I wanted to protect our family, Harper said, her voice barely audible. From what? Jonah asked. From my mother? From the woman who has always been there, for me, for the kids, for you. She was protecting herself, I said. From the truth. She knew I'd eventually put the pieces together. The missed birthdays, the last-minute changes, the way our lives became smaller and smaller. Jonah's eyes found Harper again. His wife, his supposed partner. The mother of his children, the woman who wasn't at all who she claimed to be. Is any of it real? He asked, the words thick with disbelief. Did you ever love me, or was I just convenient? It was the first time I'd ever seen Harper, Margaret, without a mask. No clever words, no subtle redirection. Just silence, a silence that answered everything. From the other room, Mason's voice rang out. Daddy, can we have ice cream? Jonah closed his eyes. A single tear tracked down his cheek. What do I tell them? He whispered. How do I explain this? We'll figure it out, I said, reaching across the table and wrapping my fingers around his. Together, as a family. Mason is still your son. That doesn't change, but he also has a biological father who loves him, who's ready to be part of his life. And maybe, just maybe, that could be a good thing. Harper turned toward the door. Margaret, I said, my voice steady. She stopped, but didn't look back. David's not going to disappear this time, I told her. And neither am I. If you try to run, if you try to twist this or use the kids to shield yourself, I leaned forward. We'll stop you. Your days of control are over. She left without a word. Just the sound of her heels on hardwood. Then the door. Behind her, only the echoes of children playing and 7 years of shattered illusions. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was losing my family. I felt like I was finally reclaiming it. 6 months later, I was in the kitchen preparing Sunday dinner when I heard the front door swing open, followed by a familiar voice echoing through the house. Grandma, we brought dessert. In here, sweetheart, I called back, smiling as I heard the quick patter of small feet rushing toward me. Mason appeared in the doorway first, arms wrapped tightly around a bakery box nearly as wide as his torso. Right behind him was Ela, stepping with her usual care, holding a small bunch of daisies. These are for you, she said shyly, extending the flowers toward me. Daddy said yellow is your favorite color. I knelt and gathered her into a hug she now returned easily, without hesitation. They're perfect, sweetheart, thank you. Jonah stepped into the kitchen next, looking more like himself than he had in years. The hollowness in his face was gone, the stress lines around his eyes softened, and behind him was David, still a little cautious at family gatherings, but slowly carving out his place in the new normal we were building together. Something smells incredible, Jonah said, kissing my cheek. Is that your famous apple pie? Specifically requested by Mason, I said with a smile, ruffling the boy's hair. Along with mashed potatoes and that herb-roasted chicken you used to love. Mason lit up. Yes, that's my favorite too, just like Daddy's. The way his eyes sparkled with joy, the pride in his voice, it stirred something fierce and tender inside me, that he felt safe, seen, and so deeply loved despite everything. It was the proof we'd needed that we were doing something right. The ease with which he used the word daddy, for both Jonah and David, still tugged at something deep inside me. But the children had adjusted to their expanded family with the quiet, remarkable resilience that kids often show. To Mason, Jonah was simply Daddy, and David had become Daddy Dave. Isla, a bit younger and more reserved, accepted it all in stride. Tommy, having two fathers, was no stranger than friends with two bedrooms in different homes. David placed a bottle of wine gently on the counter, still treating this house with a kind of reverent caution. It had once belonged to the woman who upended all of our lives. "How can I help?" he asked. "You can set the table," I replied. "The good china's in the dining room cabinet." It had taken months of therapy, careful conversations with the children, and long legal proceedings to reach this point. In the end, Harper, Margaret, had agreed to relinquish custody to avoid prosecution for fraud. And just like before, she vanished. No forwarding address, no tearful goodbye. Only this time, she'd left the children behind. It hadn't been easy. There were nights Mason cried until he couldn't anymore. And mornings, Ela clung to me like a lifeline. I held them through it all, whispering again and again that they were safe, that no one else was going anywhere. Mason was confused, heartbroken even. Despite all her deception, she'd still been his mother. Isla had clung to me for weeks, her anxiety bubbling beneath the surface, afraid anyone she loved might disappear next. But we got through it, together. There had been tears, tantrums, sleepless nights for all of us, but there had also been healing. Jonah had moved back into the house he once shared with Harper. But it didn't feel the same, not anymore. The weight of secrets and careful silences had lifted. The tension was gone, replaced with something unfamiliar and welcome. Peace. David rented an apartment 10 minutes away, close enough to be part of daily life, but with just enough space for everyone to breathe and adjust. "Grandma," Mason said, tugging on my apron as I mashed the potatoes, "can I tell you a secret?" I knelt to his level. "Of course, sweetheart." He cupped his hands around his mouth and whispered, "I'm glad you found Daddy Dave. Now I have the most daddies of anyone in my class." My heart squeezed. This brave little boy, who'd had his world shaken and rearranged, had turned it into something to be proud of. "I'm glad too, sweetheart." He leaned into my shoulder, his small hand resting over mine as if anchoring himself. That gesture, simple, instinctive, broke something open in me. A wound I hadn't realized was still healing. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "And I'm glad Mommy Harper went away. She was always mad about something." I hugged him tightly, fighting back tears. How could a 7-year-old carry such quiet sorrow and still offer the world his joy? It hurt deeply to know that he had absorbed so much, and yet still had the heart to forgive, to adapt, to hope. It hurt how aware he had been, how much he'd carried in silence. But it also reassured me that we'd made the right choice. Children always knew more than we gave them credit for. That night, over dinner, we talked like any other family. David told us about Mason's recent soccer game, how he'd scored his very first goal. Jonah shared Isla's excitement about starting dance classes. The kids chatted about school, best friends, recess. We passed dishes, we laughed, we listened. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't traditional, but it was real. Something Harper's carefully curated version of family had never been. As I helped Jonah clear the plates, he glanced toward the living room where Mason and Isla were curled on the couch, watching a cartoon. "I got a call from my lawyer yesterday," he said. "The divorce is final." I looked at him, searching his face. "How do you feel?" He paused, watching Mason help David load the dishwasher. "Relieved, mostly, and grateful that it's over, that we made it through without hurting the kids more than we had to." "Any regrets? About the marriage?" "No. About not seeing the truth sooner?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'll always regret that. The time we lost, the pain she caused, you especially." I squeezed his shoulder. "Trusting someone you love isn't a weakness, Jonah. It's part of being human." David joined us, drying his hands with a dish towel. "Any word from her?" he asked gently. Jonah shook his head. "Her lawyer says she doesn't want any contact with the kids. No visits, no calls, nothing." David was quiet. "That's probably for the best," he said after a moment. And for once, there was no tension, no debate, just a rare, complete moment of agreement. We had survived, and somehow, we had come out stronger on the other side. And for once, we all agreed. "I still can't believe it," I said softly, watching the steam curl up from my mug, "that any mother could just walk away, so completely. At least now, Jonah replied. The kids can heal, without always wondering when she might show up and turn their world upside down again. Later that night, after Mason and Isla had fallen asleep during a movie in the living room, the three of us, Jonah, David, and I, sat around the kitchen table with leftover pie and fresh coffee. These late evening talks had become some of my favorite moments. Peaceful, reflective, full of small planning and gentle progress. I've been thinking about something, David said, stirring sugar into his mug. About Mason's last name. Jonah looked up immediately. What about it? He's been a Patterson his whole life. That's his name, his records, his school, everything. I know, David nodded quickly, and I wouldn't want to take that away. But I was wondering. He hesitated, then continued. Would it be okay if I added your name to mine? Officially? David Patterson Chen. So Mason and I would share part of a name, but he'd still be connected to you, to your family history. The silence that followed was full, not of tension, but of emotion. That gesture, so humble, so thoughtful, hit me hard. My eyes welled up with tears. Jonah looked stunned. You'd really do that? David nodded. I want Mason to understand that families can be complex without being broken. That love doesn't mean choosing sides or pretending other relationships don't matter. Jonah reached across the table and shook his hand firmly. I think that's perfect. When the evening came to a close, and David was helping Mason gather his backpack and favorite stuffed animal for their weekly overnight together, I pulled him aside in the hallway. Thank you, I said quietly. For what? For saving my family. For having the courage to come to me. For telling the truth when it would have been so much easier to walk away again. David paused, watching Mason zip his jacket. You know what I realized that day I came to your door? He said. I wasn't the only one losing my son. You were losing your family too. Harper was taking us away from each other, slowly, piece by piece. But we stopped her. We did, I agreed. He smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, that smile reached his eyes. Look what we've built instead. I looked around the house, at Isla's sweater draped over a chair, at the colorful construction paper hearts Mason had taped to my refrigerator, at the new family photos on the hallway wall, photos that included David now. That felt real. That felt like us. It wasn't the family I imagined when Jonah first got married. But it was ours. And it was real. I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, reflecting on how much my life had changed since that heartbreaking birthday, 6 months ago. The same house that once felt like a tomb now pulsed with the warmth of family again. Children's laughter echoing down the hallways, David's curious questions about our quirky family traditions, and Jonah's relaxed conversations about his new future. My phone buzzed. A message from Jonah. Thanks for dinner, Mom. The kids are asking if we can do this every Sunday. I told them that was up to Grandma. I smiled and typed back. Every Sunday sounds perfect. A moment later, yes, this is what real families do. I set the phone aside and looked over at the framed photo on the side table, taken last month at the zoo. The 5 of us, standing close in front of the elephant exhibit. Mason perched high on David's shoulders, Isla holding tightly to my hand, Jonah in the center. One arm wrapped around each of us, grinning like a man who'd finally found peace. We didn't look perfect, but we looked real. A family broken apart and put back together in a new shape. Stronger, more honest. Not traditional, but true. The house creaked and settled as night fell around me, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was comforting, full, filled with the kind of love Harper had tried to erase, but couldn't. I used to think my 65th birthday was the end of my relevance in my family's story. It turns out it was the beginning of a brand new chapter. One where love was no longer conditional, where truth mattered more than appearances, and where being a grandmother meant standing guard over your grandchildren, even when the danger came from their own mother. Tomorrow was Monday. Mason had soccer. Isla had her dance class. David would pick up Mason while Jonah took Isla, and both of them would end up back here for dinner and homework, just like always. A natural rhythm born from real love and mutual respect. The kind of flow Harper would have micromanaged into something lifeless. Now it just was. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I thought about Harper. Wherever she was, probably crafting a new version of herself, spinning a new identity, searching for another family to manipulate. But she'd left something behind she could never replicate. The bond between people who choose to fight for each other, who choose love over control. Oddly enough, she taught us exactly what not to become, and in doing so, she helped us grow into who we were meant to be. For that, maybe I owe her a twisted sort of thanks. But mostly, I just feel sorry for her. She walked away from a family that, while messy and complicated, was real. And in chasing power, she lost everything that actually mattered. Her loss, our gain. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own story. I was home. So the story is over. Our wonderful friends. Are you still here with me at this late hour? If you're still watching, still listening, then maybe something in this story stirred your heart. Maybe it whispered to a part of you that's been ignored for too long. And if that's true, then let's sit together in this moment and reflect. This story was never just about a forgotten birthday dinner. It was about something deeper, how silence can grow like a shadow when truth is pushed aside. It's about how the people we trust most can sometimes turn away, and how even then, healing is possible. Families fracture, relationships break, people lie. But even after all of that, we can rebuild, if we're brave enough to confront the truth. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. That's Maya Angelou, and I think she was right. Because our character Eloise didn't stay in the dark. She stood up, faced what hurt, and reclaimed her place in the family that had almost forgotten her. That's not weakness. That's strength in its rawest, most human form. And maybe that's what this story leaves us with. The quiet reminder that no matter how far things fall apart, there's always a way forward. Sometimes we have to be the ones to pick up the broken pieces and say, this matters too much to let go. So if you're sitting with something heavy tonight, a broken bond, a lost place in someone's life, or even the fear of being forgotten, know this, you are not alone. There is still time to reclaim your voice, your worth, your story. If this story meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us reach others who might need these words. And maybe drop a comment below. Let me know what part touched you. Let's talk. We're building something real here, and I'm so glad you're a part of it.